Howdy folks, this is Big Sam. Today we've got a pretty interesting Mosin Nagant 9130 magazine. Now this one in particular came off of one of the moldy leprosy guns, and as you can see it's got some slight condition issues. A lot of these had some weird black paint to cover up the lack of finish and or pitting due to rust. This one has an interesting marking here. Now typically on a Mosin magazine the maker's mark is over here. We're going to try to get a little bit of a better look at it, but it looks like there's kind of paint or something on here, so we're going to try to clean it off a little bit to see if we can get a little bit better look of what exactly is marked on here. So in order to do that, I've got our trusty bronze brush here. Look at that, nice and shiny, new looking. It's not going to be that way for long. Now I've already kind of gone through this a little bit. You can see there's remnants of the paint here and there still. Sometimes the finish got painted over as well. A lot of these, they tended to just paint over a lot of the parts regardless of if it had finish or not, just because they were in such bad condition, and I think they were just doing it quickly. So let's get our brush here and see what we can do. I got this little sheet of paper here to catch all these little fine bits of junk that we're gonna end up removing. Otherwise it's very hard and kind of a pain to deal with. Alright, so we're gonna see how much of this is gonna come off with these soft bristles, and if nothing does, we'll switch to the fine bristles. Seems like we're slowly getting some markings here. This kind of reminds me of one of those scratch and sniff games, actually. It looks like we have, is that an 8? I don't know what that is. Let's keep going. Huh, well, that's an interesting marking. Now, what we can tell here is it seems to be relatively, well, basically no finish actually left on this part, which is, I guess, why it was painted over. But that's okay, because we don't really care about lack of finish. We're more interested in the history of things here. All right. Pardon the vacuum cleaner in the background. Hopefully that's not too distracting. Okay. Just a little bit here. I think this is good enough to see the markings. So let's take a closer look. Let's see if I can zoom in here. I need to get the lighting up a little bit. Okay. So what exactly are we looking at here? That's a good question. This could be a few things, but right off the bat, we can tell that this kind of looks like a Remington marking, which is, their marking was typically an R within a circle. So why are we seeing that on a Mosin magazine? Well, in order to show you, let me show you something else that we can kind of compare this to for reference. So here I've got a Mosin Nagant bolt produced by Remington. This comes from World War I, when Remington actually contracted with the Russians to produce hundreds of thousands of these rifles for the Tsarist government. That turned out to be a bit of a mess, but what was left was we would see random Remington parts kind of scattered throughout history within the Mosin realm. So if we look right here, we can see an R in a circle. You can also see it here on the cocking piece as well. So the marking kind of varies a little bit, but it seems like there's some resemblance here between that guy and that guy. Now, can I definitively say that that marking is the same as this marking, i.e. that this is a Remington marking? I cannot definitively say that for certain. But if y'all recall, we can look at a few other things. Now, the first thing we want to look at to confirm as if this is a Remington is this needs to be a Type 1 magazine. Now, if you remember from a previous video about which type of magazine does your Mosin have, there are two main variations of magazines. The first variation is you have this, the whole body here is actually riveted in place. You'll see these rivets. Now the Type 2, which came around in the mid-1930s, they switched from riveting to spot welding. So we would look for rivet marks on these two sides. So let's see if we can see that. Now this can be a little tricky because there's some paint on here. So I'm looking around to see if I can see anything that looks like the riveting. Now I will say this looks like it was produced, you know, fairly nicely. This doesn't really look like anything that was produced during the war. Here's an interesting marking there. Is that an Ijev's marking? Typically you wouldn't see Ijev's markings on the sides of these magazines. I'm not really sure what that is. There's another weird marking I want to get to here, but first we want to look for those riveting marks. And again, they can be really hard to spot, but I think I may have seen one on this particular gun. There is one maybe there. I think maybe there. I do believe this is a Type 1 magazine, though. So, I mean, if this was from World War I, this would have to be a Type 1 magazine. I think there's one right there. There should be one here, but there's paint right there as of now, so I can't really see that. But yeah, I don't see the spot welding. It looks like maybe that's a rivet there. I think there's supposed to be two rivets on here, so like one down here and then one there. So this does in fact look like a Type 1 magazine. The construction doesn't really look like this was done during the World War II. They tend to look a lot cruder. Now let's look at something else that's really interesting. So I don't find any evidence to suggest that this was made during World War II, so that's good. That's what we want to see if it's a Remington. There's something else here. Look at this. Never seen this before. But under the magazine, upside down, it's marked 9-14. So what does that mean? Well, this can be kind of hard to say. Now, the only thing I can think of that I've seen anything remotely like this on Mosins before is sometimes you would see refurbishment markings on the top of the receiver tang on the very back. Not the bottom. Remember, the bottom is where the date will be stamped on a receiver tang. You have to take the stock off to see that. But these would be stamped on the top. So like if you're holding the gun, here's your trigger finger, it would be like right here on the top. So that could be a refurbishment marking. I don't know if this is a year. I don't think so because I haven't seen a marking like this before. But it's very fascinating. If you have a marking like this on a magazine or a similar part, let me know. Because I've only seen markings like this on the actual receivers. I've never seen a marking like this on a part before. It's possible it's a date, but I don't actually think Remington was even producing Mosins in September of 1914. I think it took them a little bit longer to start the production. But we'll just say that's weird. So let's look at our marking one more time here. Okay, now again, we're not exactly sure if this is an R. I mean, it kind of looks like it could be a K, but then again, kind of looks like an R as well. But normally you would see the Ijevsk triangle with an arrow in it right here. But we do not see that. This is very uncommon to see. I would expect to see that, or maybe a Tula star, or an old Tula hammer, but we don't see any of that here. So this is just kind of weird, folks. But I think this is a really good, I guess, example, you could say, of why we should pay closer attention to Mosins. Even if it's a run-of-the-mill 9130 rifle that's from World War II that doesn't seem to be that old for Mosins. And especially one like this that was from the moldy leprosy batch that had, well, quite frankly, a lot of condition issues. If we would have just glanced over that gun and discounted it because of the condition, we never would have found this really interesting potential Remington magazine. Regardless who made it, though, it's actually really fascinating. And I always looking at really weird stuff, and I thought this was another really good example of something weird, and another good example of why you should take a closer look at your Mosin. Next time you've got yours disassembled, make sure to look at some of the neat markings on it. And even the marking down here, right? You don't have to disassemble your rifle, because if you just flip it over and look underneath the stock there, turned around, you can see this marking here on the bottom to see who made your magazine. So, really cool. Thank you guys for watching. Let me know if y'all got any prayer requests, and we'll see you next time.